Profile pieces bring a little bit of humanity into any niche, and people really love profile pieces for that reason. Even if you're in a niche that seems like it's not really conducive to a profile piece, it absolutely can be. So let me give you an example of that. You sell toner cartridges. Not very exciting, right? Not necessarily something that you think of as being able to get really human with it. But why not find out more about the supplier that you use and how he founded his company and his goals and dreams in relation to his company and how toner fits in with that. If your main product is, say, HP inks, consider writing about HP's founder or their current leadership or management team and put it under the umbrella of more than just inks or more than just printers. You could do a piece on how the toner marketplace is getting to be more earth-friendly, and then you could talk about the person or one of the people who may have started that movement some years back. You want to consider unsung heroes when you're doing profile pieces because folks love underdog stories. And also consider the massive successes. People can absolutely learn from success stories. You can also do a profile piece from the perspective of how an older generation used to do things in a niche. So for example, backpacking today is super duper different from the kind of backpacking that John Muir did in the late 1800s. So you could use a profile piece to highlight several things about those differences. You could look at how the niche has changed over time. And, to go back to our John Muir and backpacking example, you could talk about how the equipment is different than it used to be. You could talk about just how the general knowledge of how the world works or how, in this case, endurance sports, that kind of things work. You could talk about the different philosophies that perhaps the older generation has versus the newer generation. You could talk about the popularity. Is this niche as popular as it once was? Has it changed in popularity over time? You could also look at what the older generation might think of how things have changed in the niche. Do they approve of the direction that the niche has gone in? Why? Why not? You could bring a little bit of nostalgia and simplicity back to the way that we currently look at the niche by looking at how that older generation, again, once participated in the niche. So back to tomato gardening, right? There's the way that people gardened and the way that people grew their own food 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago with the backyard gardens that we had here in the U.S. during World War II. Those sorts of things are very, very different than the way that people approach gardening now. And so you could talk about those differences and maybe, like I said, bring a little bit of nostalgia, a little bit of simplicity back to things if the old way was simpler. And in some cases it might not be, and you might want to talk about that as well. But it's a compare and contrast kind of exercise that you can do when you look back and then look at now in a profile piece. Now, to contrast that, profiles can also be really fascinating when you're focusing on a person who's brand spanking new to a niche. So example time, I'm sure that you've seen pieces that focused on stories like a first round draft pick NFL quarterback. He's new to, and we're talking about American football, he's brand new to professional football. And while he's probably performed really well in his past in high school or in college, going pro is new to this person. And he's full of hope. But there's fear, too. Is he going to be able to up his game once he gets to that pro level and plays in his first game? Profile pieces like that are full of kind of a tension, a walking the line between hope and between fear. And that's what can make those sorts of pieces where you're talking about somebody new to a niche, that's what can make them successful. And when we look at backpacking or we look at any other niche, we might not have the equivalent of a first-round draft pick to do a profile piece on. But consider the person climbing any new summit for the first time, or the tomato gardener who for the first year ever goes to all organic pest control and fertilizers. There's still a story there. There's still somebody who does have a goal, somebody who has certain hopes and dreams, and those hopes and dreams may or may not be fulfilled. And that's what makes a profile piece successful. Profiles also don't even actually have to be about individual people. You consider profiling a town, you consider profiling an object, you could profile an event or a company. How was it once used? Has it gained or lost popularity since its inception? Is it popular for the same reasons that it once was? Is it a symbol of growth or is it a symbol of decline? Did the people who once believed in this thing still believe in it? What has changed? What's been learned? All of those things can be included, and you can take an inanimate object who's not a person and still attach a lot of human feelings to it, because there are humans involved in everything from towns to companies to individual objects. So you can attach those human emotions to those things. You can also use a profile piece to highlight a story from your own life or your own history within the niche. And again, people love to be able to put a face and a story behind a blog or behind a website and to learn about who you are. It's really, really tough to be a market leader if no one knows anything about you. So you can use a profile piece to tell your story, tell how you got into the niche, tell what was most challenging for you or what you've learned from the niche about life as a whole. Profile pieces are not about a Wikipedia type biography that lists just the facts. While the facts will likely come into your profile piece and kind of set the stage for where things might be, those facts are not the story in and of themselves. So let's look at some of the common elements and goals that you will find in a profile piece, or to at least consider if you're creating a profile piece. It's going to be focused tightly on one thing. So if you're talking about, again, let's get back John Muir and backpacking, you don't want to branch out into Ralph Waldo Emerson or a different backpacker who may have come around in the 1950s, as opposed to John Muir's late 1800s backpacking, because then that starts to skip around and the piece isn't as focused. So you want to do a laser focused piece on the one element, item, person, company, thing that you are trying to highlight here. They should also be specific, and so we would never do a profile piece on backpackers as a whole. Our profile piece would instead be about one backpacker, and that's what makes it interesting, because it's about one individual person. You also want to look for common threads. So there may be a story in a person or a company's inception in the beginning, in their childhood, that you see played out again later on as they become a professional or a success in their individual niche. There may be a commonality of, say, somebody getting fired over and over and over again, or whatever the case may be. And you'll want to kind of look at what that might mean. So look for different threads, different things that kind of seem to be a theme in the life of the person, the place, or the thing. You also want to include details. Details are very important. And by that, I mean not only to be specific about a backpacker, an individual person, versus backpackers as a whole, but I mean details about that person. Where are they from? Not from the United States. Where in the United States is that person from? What specifically kind of equipment does that person use? What specifically, who's their partner? What color hair do they have? That all adds humanity to a piece. And also talk about a profile piece sometimes gives folks the idea that they're getting sort of a behind the scenes look at something. And that doesn't even have to be like the NFL first round draft quarterback example, where we're getting a behind the scenes look at how the NFL works. And it's sort of a closed door situation. I mean that you get sort of a behind the scenes look at even a normal person's life, because we all come home at night and we shut our doors and we close our curtains, and nobody sees what our lives are really, really like, except for maybe the one or two people that we live with or our children. And in a profile piece, you kind of have the opportunity to give people that behind the scenes feel of what it is like to be in that person's shoes. You also want to always ask why. Don't tell me that so-and-so divorced so-and-so. I want to know why. That's what's interesting. I want to know John Muir explored Yosemite and thought that it was one of the most beautiful places on earth, or an equivalent thereof. Why? What touched him about that place? I want to know those kinds of things. And again, that's what makes a profile piece interesting, is to talk about why. What's the motivation? What's the reason? What is the commonality between these things that makes a person become attracted to it? Why is this person interested in the niche? All of those questions are what can make a profile piece more human and more interesting. Profiles can incorporate some elements of an interview as well, although they don't have to. But if you're considering doing a profile piece, go ahead and watch the interviews video as well, because it'll give you some more ideas about telling an individual person's story.